The Middle Ages were characterized by a high level of religiosity and Puritan morals. The Church tried to regulate all spheres of human life. Relationships outside of marriage were prohibited. Harlots were subjected to cruel torture and the death penalty. However, even in such conditions, the sprouts of human depravity and vice managed to hatch and bear fruit. This was especially noticeable in cities, which often turned into rafts of all sorts of debauchery. Kings and even the Pope were libertines and sodomites. In this issue we will get acquainted with the most notorious cases of moral depravity of the inhabitants of the Middle Ages. In the first centuries of its existence, the Christian Church was especially fanatical, including the relationship between a man and a woman. The idea was considered a spiritual union that denied intimate connection. Early Christian theologians cited as an example an incident that occurred with a married couple, who shared a common bed all their lives but managed to preserve the innocence of both spouses until their deaths. Of course, procreation was a necessity, and therefore intimate relationships were inevitable, no matter how much the Church wanted to avoid it. But that part of the process that affected pleasure was condemned and considered a crime against Christianity. It even got to the point that Irish theologians forbade husbands from seeing their wives naked. That is, intimate communication in this case was possible only in the dark. However, in reality the situation often turned out somewhat differently. Rich and spoiled aristocrats simply did not understand why they should give up their pleasures. Possible consequences in the form of castration or the death penalty did not stop them. In some countries, for example in Italy, traitors had their noses cut off and publicly flogged in the city square. The forbidden fruit only seemed even more tempting. However, sometimes the punishments turned out to be more humiliating than dangerous, and sometimes they even became fun for other townspeople. For example, in northern France, fornicators were forced to run completely naked through the entire city. At the same time, the woman ran ahead, holding in her hands a rope tied to the genital organ of her gentleman. But as was said earlier, such punishments did not frighten those who were accustomed to consider themselves superior to the common people and not to restrain themselves from any pleasures. In such circles, the scale of debauchery and vice sometimes reached truly incredible proportions. The Church itself, which spoke most for moral purity, was no exception. For example, let us recall several high-profile cases that occurred inside church walls. First of all, it is certainly worth mentioning the pirate Balthasar Casus, who managed to become Pope John XIII. Being the head of the Catholic Church, Balthasar nevertheless did not recognize its spiritual principles. He was overthrown within a year and charged with raping 300 nuns, incest, selling sacred relics, and even sodomy. Another case occurred at Littlemore Nunnery in England at the beginning of the 16th century. Then a special church commission visited it to check the rumors that were spreading around this place, and indeed the commission discovered a nest of debauchery on the site of the monastery. Local nuns organized drunken orgies with Christians, and even the abbess of the temple herself had a child from a vicious relationship. All church property was sold to buy booze, and when there was no money left, the monastery turned into a simple brothel. Representatives of the royal authorities did not lag behind church dignitaries, so Henry VIII, King of England, even created his church so that nothing would stop him from changing wives like gloves. He executed the annoying companions and immediately chose new ones. In total he had 6 official wives and an unknown number of mistresses. But such anti-church manifestations reached their greatest extent among ordinary townspeople. It is enough to look into the judicial archives of Paris or any other large city to discover the most appalling manifestations of vice and violence. Ordinary brothels no longer surprised anyone. Entire families, including small children, took part in such acts. They often ended in murder or disability. Neither punishment nor an appeal to the church could stop the debauchery that reigned in the cities. For this reason, many theologians saw the frequent epidemics of plague and other leprosy as divine punishment for the devilish immorality of Europeans. But death itself was powerless here. This is a brief history of the moral decline of the inhabitants of the Middle Ages. However, this topic is quite extensive and cannot be fully covered in one video. Many interesting cases remained behind the scenes, but if this video interests you, then in the future we will try to tell even more about the morals of the Middle Ages and beyond. Thanks to everyone who watched this video to the end. To find out about the latest releases, you just need to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. Also leave your thoughts in the comments and give it a thumbs up. See you soon.